Greetings and welcome back. In our last video lecture, we found out that George Herbert Walker Bush would lose the election of 1992 to Bill Clinton, and probably the most important reason that he lost had everything to do with the economy. As a matter of fact, in 1992, when Bill Clinton was on the campaign trail, the campaign's motto was, "It's the economy, stupid." Okay? So the economy bottoming out in 1991, 1992 is really going to bring us Bill Clinton. And Clinton is really going to crunch the numbers. His administration is going to look at the scenario. And what they're going to find is a glaring, obvious issue that needs to be fixed sooner rather than later. In other words, unless you take care of health care, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to fix some of these more fundamental problems in the American economy. Okay? Healthcare is going to become the number one issue out of the gate for the Clinton administration. On the one hand, this does have an economic factor to it. On the other hand, you've got millions and millions of Americans that don't have adequate access to healthcare insurance. The individual that Bill Clinton is going to choose to sort of spearhead this effort, massive campaign if there ever was one, very competent, very well educated, and very well able to take care of this issue. The only problem is she also happens to be the First Lady. The person that Bill Clinton puts in charge of this healthcare reform overhaul is none other than Hillary Rodham Clinton. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that this was a terrible idea from just an ability standpoint, but it is very easy to attack. And if you happen to be somebody that does not like Bill Clinton so much, this is a very piece of low-hanging fruit, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay? The program that Hillary Clinton and her team is going to advocate for, that's more than likely what we would call universal health care insurance. And the bill would be footed mostly by employers, okay? And so, as I told you the last time we met, Bill Clinton's going to make some pretty powerful enemies, and corporate America is not going to like this whole idea of having to pay for other people's health insurance. And they're going to kind of join this growing chorus of anti Clinton forces in American life. It's also opposed by many healthcare companies as well as the American Medical Association. To make a long story short, there's an enormous amount of blowback that you're seeing mobilizing against this initiative to reform healthcare. And in the end, it breaks this effort. The healthcare reform overhaul does not go forward. And the result is more than 40 million Americans that don't have access to adequate health insurance. This was the big missing link in Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Harry Truman, although he tried, he wasn't able to pass it either. Lyndon Johnson was able to give us Medicare and Medicaid, but generally speaking, there's still a massive chunk of the American populate by the end of the 20th century that does not have access to adequate health care insurance. If you are a reader of recent history, right, late 20th century history, you'll know that Bill Clinton is described as a very liberal president. That's not entirely true. It's not entirely untrue, but certainly when it comes to social issues, Bill Clinton is a liberal, okay? Clinton is going to appoint Supreme Court justices that will bring more of a liberal approach to review of the law. And of course, I'm talking about people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer, and they would continue to be the liberal wing of the Supreme Court through the rest of the 1990s and even into the early 2000s. He's also going to appoint the first female Attorney General, America's top law enforcement official. That would be Janet Reno. He appointed Madeleine Albright to lead the Secretary of State position. Albright is going to go on to become the first ever female Secretary of State. And so you do begin to see politics changing a little bit when it comes to who Bill Clinton is bringing into the White House. You also see a liberal approach to some of these other social issues some of which had, multiplier effects in the economy and some that didn't. The first one that I'd like you to be mindful of would be the Family Medical Leave Act, which he passes in 1993. Now, what Family Medical Leave Act will do well into the 21st century is it will give people who are considered the primary caregivers of their loved ones, very broadly interpreted, it will give them the ability to take time off from their job. It depends on exactly when you're talking about, but up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave time, and it prevents their employers from firing them. Okay? Now, where he's going with this is his economic security. Similar to Theodore Roosevelt in the early 20th century, one little hiccup, one little, misstep, and you no longer can work, and your employer can fire you. I think this is where Bill Clinton was going when it comes to providing that level of safety and security for American workers. That simply because your grandfather or your mother got very, very sick and you needed to take care of her did not mean that your employer could basically just terminate you because you were going to need to take some time off. That is going to be pretty well received by America's workers, and America's employers, especially your bigger employers, are not going to like it so much. You're also going to see Bill Clinton pass something called the Clinic Entrance Act of 1994. I know that Roe versus Wade, passed in 1973, ultimately made abortion legal in the United States. And I'm hopeful that you understand that it awakened a sleeping giant, and that would be the religious right. These individuals are conservative voters that begin to swarm into politics, and it's really the Roe Supreme Court decision that's bringing them back in. By the 1980s, you had seen violence erupting at clinics that were providing abortion services. Buildings were being bombed, burned. In some more than extreme cases, you had doctors that were known to perform these services that were assassinated, some others beaten up. What the Clinic Entrance Act will do is it'll make it a federal crime to interfere with somebody's access to or exit from a clinic. And so, as you might imagine, this is not going to win Bill Clinton too many friends in the evangelical Christian community. Religious right voters are really going to be isolated when it comes to this particular issue. I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this, but Bill Clinton's making himself a lot of enemies, and there's a lot of people that are beginning to say one-term president. But the big one's going to come with the Brady Bill of 1993, okay? James Brady was an advisor in the Reagan administration, and I didn't get a chance to talk to you about the failed assassination attempt on his life in his presidential years. Brady was standing next to the president when a gunman opened fire, and Brady was hit, and he was paralyzed from the waist down. And Brady, a Republican, went on to be quite an outspoken supporter of gun control measures. Nothing really, crazy, but certainly common sense sort of measures designed to keep guns out of the hands of people that probably shouldn't have them. In 1993, Clinton was able to get a law that was passed called the Brady Bill. He named it after Brady, kind of to pay homage to him. And what it's going to do is it's going to provide universal background checks. If you want a firearm, you have to have your background checked, and you need to be cleared. If you have some issues involving domestic violence, if you've got some issues involving some checkered past with the law, might put a little bit of a limit on your ability to exercise your Second Amendment right. It also mandated a waiting period, a cooling off period. It wasn't instantaneous. You couldn't just go into your local gun shop and walk out with a Glock 9, right? Um, the group that this is going to offend deeply is going to be one of the more powerful, one of the more well organized, and one of the more politically active groups in America. And of course, that would be the National Rifle Association. And they're going to begin to put lots and lots of money into the 1996 presidential campaign. I might also add, not just somebody to run against Bill Clinton, but also senators, congressmen, and politicians a little bit lower down on the ladder. The NRA is going to be very, very, shall we say, motivated by the Brady bill. Okay. Now, when it comes to Bill Clinton's liberalism, I think it's very safe to say that they stop when it comes to these social issues. In many, many ways, Bill Clinton is a conservative, or at the worst, he is a middle of the road moderate Democrat. Let me give you a couple examples. In 1993, largely at the behest of the Republican controlled Congress, Clinton is going to pass something that comes to be known as the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Now, what NAFTA is going to do is it's going to transform North America, and I do include Mexico here, it's going to transform it into a trade free zone. What that means is you can produce Chevy trucks in Mexico, you can import them into the United States and Canada, and you can sell them without any import or export tax on your trucks. You can lower your operating costs because labor is less expensive in Mexico, and you can charge the same price for your products in the United States and Canada. If you follow me, this is designed to compete more effectively with what had become known as the European Union. Germany, France, Italy, Sweden, Denmark, they had adopted this free trade zone in Europe to compete with the Americans in an earlier time period. It simplified their currency, so you had a more even rate of exchange. If you're familiar with the euro, this is what I'm talking about. It allowed countries that labor was a little bit cheaper, like Italy and Spain. It allowed countries like Germany and Britain to go into those countries and utilize that cheap labor force and more effectively compete with the American economy. So in a way, this is a matter of keeping up with the Joneses, but in another way, this is going to contribute to the deindustrialization of the United States. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand this, or an economist for that matter, right? If all you care about is making money, and you can make a lot more money by producing in Mexico, then this is a no-brainer. Relocate your production facilities to Mexico, and you're going to save an awful lot of money. And one individual, an unlikely individual that really kind of sounds the warning to the American economy, is none other than Ross Perot, Texas billionaire that actually ran against Bill Clinton and George H.W. Bush in 1992. What he said was, if you allow NAFTA to go forward, you're going to hear a giant sucking sound coming from our southwestern border. And that sucking sound is going to be American jobs that are being sucked up by the Mexican economy. And that turned out to be a prediction that was largely true. We're going to lose hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs throughout the 1990s and even into the early 21st century. And NAFTA does contribute pretty mightily to this process. It will also complicate the Mexican economy as well, because now these Mexican farmers, many of which are producing corn, they have to compete with the Kansas and Nebraskas of the world. Cheap American corn that these massive corporations are producing, and now they can bring that into Mexico. They can sell it cheaper than these Mexican farmers. And obviously, what this is going to do is it's going to complicate the Mexican economy in the sense that it's going to push people off of their land. It's going to contribute to a growing wave of immigration, and you're going to see people that are trying to come to the United States for the same reasons that people in Russia, people in Italy had begun coming to the United States in the early 20th century. They'd been pushed off their land and they wanted more economic opportunity. Okay. You do see more and more of an internationalization of the workforce in the 1990s. And one reason why is an organization that comes to be known as the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And what the WTO was dedicated to doing was expanding free trade as far and as wide as possible. Think of NAFTA only more on a global scale. Lower these borders all over the place, right? If two countries are producing the same thing, if the United States and China, for example, are both producing computers and China can produce them for much cheaper than the United States can, then there's no reason that the United States should not buy Chinese computers. Um, American consumers are going to benefit from lower prices. We're also going to benefit because we can focus on the things that we produce in the American economy more effectively than China or Russia or anywhere else. And we can produce that. We can become more efficient, as an economist would say. Now, of course, what this ignores is some of the social consequences that will come along with an internationalization of a workforce. Consequences like environmental change, right? What scientists call climate change, global warming. Um, the environmental standards in places like India, China, Mexico are far more relaxed than they are in the United States, Germany, or France. You also have human rights that could potentially be violated if you see more of an internationalization of a workforce. In countries like Bangladesh, you don't have the same sort of worker rights. You don't have the same sort of human rights for that matter. And obviously, this provokes a question in that capacity as well. Well, all of this is going to come to a head in 1999 when the WTO was set to meet in Seattle, Washington, to kind of finalize some plans that would bring more and more free trade, fewer and fewer restrictions on free trade to the global marketplace. One organization that had been watching the WTO like a hawk was this organization calling itself Global Watch. Now, for your notes, Global Watch was an organization that was really very critical of free trade. For the reasons that I've already outlined, they didn't like some of these multiplier effects that free trade was bringing. And so it consisted of environmentalists that did not want to continue to see the destruction of the environment that could potentially lead to irreversible change. Human rights activists that would bring attention to the fact that you have, in some cases, children working in sweatshop conditions that would have looked pretty familiar to, somebody like Jurgis Rudkis from the jungle earlier in the 20th century. You had labor unionists and workers' rights advocates that proclaimed that this would continue to contribute to the deindustrialization of the American economy, making it more and more difficult for working families to not only compete but to simply find a job. In short, Global Watch was comprised of many different groups of people, and in 1999, they were able to demonstrate this massive interruption, and ultimately is going to degenerate into riots. The police are on hand. There are all kinds of people that are going to be arrested. And to make a long story short, Global Watch is basically able to prevent the WTO from meeting in that particular occasion. Okay, and so you do see some contested terrain. Although Bill Clinton is a pretty big supporter of free trade, not everybody. Keep in mind, a lot of those people that were marching with Global Watch were generally speaking Clinton supporters. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the long-term impact of Clinton's economy. One of the things that Bill Clinton dedicated himself to doing in his years as president is balancing the budget, and he had a lot of help from the Republican-controlled Congress in his years. What we wanted to do was get back in terms of financial sanity. Keep in mind that throughout many of the Reagan and Bush years, we had these massive, huge budget deficits. We were spending a lot more money than we were taking in. Bill Clinton wanted to balance that out. And so one of the things that he begins doing, and the Republicans also begin working alongside with him, is they begin boosting the tax rate, okay? For your top wage earners, your very, very wealthy Americans, he's going to boost the tax bracket up to 40%. He's going to reverse from where Ronald Reagan was going with a tax approach in the economy. For corporations, it was raised to 35%. Now, nobody likes paying taxes. I don't like paying taxes. But I want to draw your attention to that bottom graph down there to kind of show you the impact of this increased tax rate. If you look throughout the late 1970s, we're beginning to see the budget deficit go up, and then it really begins to spike. It really begins to go up in the 1980s, in the Reagan years. Reaganomics, cutting taxes for the very wealthy in the hope that they'll trickle it down. That's all fine and well, but ultimately you still have these big programs. Military, Medicare, Social Security, all of these things cost money and you can't really cut them, right? And so once these tax increases begin to become laws, we're able to close the deficit. I want to make sure that you're clear on this. We're not eliminating the national debt. We're driving it down, and that's helpful. But really what we're doing is we're balancing it, right? And toward the end of the 1990s, you've got a balanced budget. The amount of money coming into the federal government is the amount of money going out. That's the amount of money that we're spending. And by the time that Bill Clinton is going to leave office, he's actually going to have a budget surplus. When you have a budget surplus, it means that you've paid all of your bills and now you have some disposable income. And that's basically what it meant for the federal government as well. And when the federal government had this disposable income, it does result in economic growth. The 1990s, especially from 1992 forward, are very prosperous years in the American economy. Okay, and Bill Clinton's tax policies are really important within that concept. Okay, but going back to this whole issue of Bill Clinton and a one-term president, there's a lot of people that were counting their chickens before they were hatched, if you understand what I mean. Okay. In 1994, there's a sweeping wave of Republicans that are going to be elected into office. They're going to pick up seats in both houses of Congress. Republican governors will win. Republican mayors will win. It's a massive red wave, if you will, in 1994. In that same year, this is one of the reasons we think that they were successful. Speaker of the House of Representatives, a guy from Georgia by the name of Newt Gingrich, is going to team up with a Texas congressman by the name of Dick Armey, and they're going to write what comes to be known as the Contract with America. Now, what the Contract with America is a promise between the Republican Party and the American people that if you elect us, if you put power in our hands, we will we will continue to hold the government accountable. What we will do is we will continue to work to lower taxes whenever and wherever we can. We will work to get spending under control. We will continue to balance the budget. We will be tough on crime. We are not going to, apologize for people that break the law in one form or fashion or another. We are going to be tough on crime. We are going to bring welfare reform, entitlement reform, okay? If you are a person that is receiving federal assistance, they proposed time limits or expiration dates on that. You'll have X amount of years, and if you don't have a job after the time expires, then you'll be thrown off of relief. This really resonates. This Republican promise really resonates with the American voters. And it's not just in 1994 that they're going to see a lot of success for this. They will in 1996, 1998, and 2000 as well. The electoral results of the contract with America will continue and will reverberate really throughout the rest of the 1990s and even a little bit into the early 2000s. Okay. What this Republican resurgence is going to lead a lot of Americans to believe is Bill Clinton is completely done for in 1996. Okay, one of the things that the Republicans tried to do in 1996 is portray Bill Clinton as this morally bankrupt, completely corrupt, government official that had no business being in the White House. They attacked some of his infidelity to his wife earlier on when he was the governor of the state of Arkansas. A lot of individuals within American politics portrayed him as this naive president that really didn't know what he was doing. In short, they really began to ante up the attacks. The problem with that, the unanticipated consequence, is that the Republicans are really going to unite Democratic voters around the president. Okay? Bill Clinton is going to attract a lot of support from people, not only on the left, but people in the center as well. And in the process, the Republicans are going to run a guy, a senator from Kansas by the name of Bob Dole. And the problem with Bob Dole is not that he's not a good politician or doesn't have a good solid track record of being a conservative. His problem is that there's really nothing that's going to make anybody fall in love with Bob Dole, right? He was a very ho-hum sort of candidate, and it did not do nearly enough to excite the Republican base to walk out and vote in 1996. To make a long story short, Bill Clinton is going to um, defeat Bob Dole. It's going to be very decisive. It is not going to leave anything at all up to the imagination, and he's going to survive, right? Well, if you were planning on, defeating him defeating him in the election, and he's just survived his election, and you desperately want this guy out of office, then there's really only one thing left for you to do. You've got to impeach him. The only problem is, unlike some political commentators in our time, to impeach a president, it's got to be for something a little bit more substantial than, well, I don't like him very much, right? That president has to break the law. That's the way that it goes. Now, um, it was no secret that Bill Clinton had extramarital affairs, both before his presidency and also during his presidency. And one of those individuals that accused Bill Clinton of sexual harassment was a woman by the name of Paula Jones. I don't have enough time to really dig into exactly what's going on here, but let's just say it was a classic example of he said, she said, and there was no real concrete way for Jones to prove her allegations. And Bill Clinton went on the offensive. He began, when he was under oath, wagging his finger into the camera, saying, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. You know what? While I'm on the topic here, I also did not have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky. Now, what Lewinsky was a White House intern, okay? And she was somebody that had access to the president, and the idea that Clinton didn't have sexual relations with her, right? That was laughable. It was laughable to anybody with a 10-mile radius of Washington, okay? It might not have been, textbook, if you understand what I'm saying, but everybody knew that there was something going on, including the Republican-controlled Congress. And considering he's under oath, what the Republicans just realized is that he's perjured himself, right? You can't lie under oath, and it doesn't matter if you're, Alger Hiss, average Joe American, or President of the United States. We're all subject to the law. And so what they begin doing is mobilizing for impeachment. He's just broken the law. The House of Representatives is controlled by the Congress. And what the Congress is going to do is appoint a special prosecutor, a guy that would later go on to become president of Baylor University, Kenneth Starr. Starr is going to conduct a investigation, and ultimately it's going to end with a report. And let's just say it leaves absolutely nothing to the imagination in terms of the nature and the dynamic of the Clinton-Lewinsky relationship. In short, it very much demonstrates that Bill Clinton lied under oath. And so the House of Representatives introduced articles of impeachment, even though the American people, when polled, said that we don't like this idea, right? Maybe we don't like Bill Clinton, maybe we don't really like what he was up to, but the bottom line is most Americans would have probably called this a waste of time. And one of the reasons that they considered it a waste of time was because that the Democrats own the Senate. Keep in mind, just because the House impeaches a guy like Andrew Johnson, who was also impeached in the end of the Civil War. Johnson was impeached, but when he went on trial, he survived. He was not removed from the presidency. He came one vote short of being removed. Bill Clinton goes on trial in the Senate, and he is overwhelmingly acquitted. People do not vote to remove him from office. Senators don't vote to remove him from office. And so, once again, he's going to survive. I mean, maybe it's best to say it's not for no good reason that Bill Clinton was nicknamed the comeback kid, right? In any case, he is going to pay a political toll for this. The Democratic Party, generally speaking, is going to pay a price for this. And that price is they're not really ever able to fashion a democratic message for the future when it comes to why they should be elected. This is all happening in 1998, 1999, and in 2000 you're going to see another election. And the guy that's going to win the Republican nomination is a guy by the name of George W. Bush, who will come up with what we call compassionate conservatism. You need to vote for me because I'm a compassionate conservative. We'll get into what that means a little bit later, but for right now, there really is no Democratic, no liberal alternative to this. And part of the reason is Bill Clinton is on trial for his presidential life. Okay? Now, I'd say that the political price that the country pays is with our foreign policy. Bill Clinton was not a foreign policy expert. We're not talking about a Jack Kennedy or a Richard Nixon, right? He even admitted he did not come to Washington to really reinvent the foreign policy wheel. He came to Washington primarily to, fix the economy. The problem with that is you're beginning to see some extremism throughout the world on the rise. You see it in places like Haiti. You saw it in places like Africa. In the Eastern African nation of Somalia, you begin to see what Clinton would later become convinced was genocide. He sent in U.S. forces, and if you're looking at the PowerPoint presentation, bear with me, these Black Hawk helicopters were sent into Mogadishu, the capital city, to take out some of these Somali warlords that were responsible for crimes against humanity. Well, these militants managed to shoot down one of these Black Hawk helicopters, and it became this huge, huge issue. And Bill Clinton, similar to Ronald Reagan in Beirut, decided that this was not worth American lives. Keep in mind, we are living in a post-Vietnam era world, and the American people are far less willing than we once upon a time were to shed blood on foreign soil. Clinton brings the people back home. You also see Islamic extremism on the rise. In 1993, this guy by the name of Osama bin Laden, in charge of this organization that nobody knew what it was Al Qaeda, bombed the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers in New York City. Now, I know what you're thinking, but this was 8 years earlier, right? The bomb that'll be detonated will do some good damage, but it won't take down the buildings. What it should have been was a massive warning that we better really pay attention to what's going on, especially in the Middle Eastern world. Another very huge, man the torpedoes message would be the bombing of a U.S. ship by the name of the Cole. The USS Cole was docked off the coast of Yemen in the Middle East, and it was Osama bin Laden's terrorist network of Al Qaeda that bombed it, that claimed responsibility. There are going to be U.S. sailors that are killed in this process. And all the while that this is going on, you've got Bill Clinton wrapped up in this Lewinsky trial. And so this is the price that we're going to pay. Our eye is not exactly on the ball when it comes to some of these really, really concerning issues that are going to become really the essence of our foreign policy crisis in the early 2000s, right? One final example before I let you go that I hope sheds some light on this all at the time. I very vividly remember when the Cole was bombed and Bill Clinton coming on the TV around about that same time saying that he had launched Tomahawk missiles into this medicine factory off the coast of Eastern Africa. And I remember that night watching The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, which was a brand new TV show at the time. And Stewart called it Operation Shield Me from Impeachment, kind of a play on Operation Desert Storm. But considering Bill Clinton was on trial for the Lewinsky scandal, a lot of people saw this as a distraction. This was an attempt to get America to look over there. All the while, there's a lot of really nasty things going on in this trial. And so this is a good example that Bill Clinton actually wasn't lying. He was telling the truth. This is a very concerning issue, but we're not really all that focused on that. You'll see what I mean both in the next video lecture and certainly the one thereafter. But for right now, guys, that's where I want to leave it.